Welcome to another episode of Cadence Fishing TV, and I've just netted an absolutely beautiful roach. It's been quite a long time coming, but that's already made the session worthwhile. Absolutely awesome. The venue I'm fishing today is Woodland Waters, which is near Grantham in Lincolnshire, and it's a venue that my good friend from Anglers Mail, Dave Costa, put me onto. He's recently moved to the area and he's discovered this fantastic fishery, and what really appealed to me was the fact that he was catching some beautiful roach on the pole. So that was the thinking today, really, was to come and try the fishery out, and just to sort of edge my bets, I set up a small feeder and my pole, and we were starting to get a little bit worried. I've been fishing for probably 2.5 hours, and apart from a few small perch we weren't really catching, but I just tried the pole again and had 2 decent roach, about 5 or 6 ounces, and then that big roach which must have been around about a pound. So it's always challenging when you come to a new venue, but also really rewarding, and hopefully that will be the start of some more roach. So we'll see how the session progresses. Woodland Waters is a beautiful fishery, and the pool we've selected to fish today is called the Specimen Lake, and obviously that's particularly targeting specimen carp, but Dave's been catching these big roach here and also some nice bream. So that was the reason for fishing this lake. There's several lakes on the complex and they all look absolutely fantastic, really nicely established, and it's just beautiful sitting here. But again, Dave put me on this peg and it's one that he's done well on, and I was really surprised when I plumbed up on the pole initially. It's really quite deep. It's around about 15 foot, just fishing at 11 meters, and with that in mind, I decided not to go too far out, and also not really knowing the venue too well, I decided to be very cautious with how I fed. So I fed 4 small balls of ground bait laced with a few casters and a few pinkies. That was definitely a bite then. I just missed a bite, so I just check my bait, and after that I've just been loose feeding casters very gently, just to really try and work out and establish what's going to be the best way to feed today. And the other thing I did was I also started on a feeder and put 4 or 5 feederfuls of bait out, the same ground bait, a few casters, a few dead pinkies, and on the feeder I fished around about 35 meters out. So really what that did was it gave me another option. You know, some days you won't catch on the pole, but you will catch on the feeder, and it just gave us a plan B if the pole line didn't work out. So all I'm doing now is just gradually loose feeding casters, and I had to make a few adjustments to my float, and actually I'm fishing around about 6 inches over depth now, and I'm fishing with a single caster on the hook. And as with all new venues, it's just a matter of just feeling your way in, obviously listening to local advice regarding what pegs and what the target species is, but then just a matter of working it out yourself. Well, that feels like another roach, not as big as the one I just had, but we're fishing at the end of March, so it's just the very, very beginning of spring, and it can be a tricky time. The fishing and the fish are kind of in transition really between the winter and obviously as the water starts to warm up. That's a lovely, beautiful roach. Again, taken on a single caster. Well, they're starting to come now. That's another decent medium-sized roach. I think I mentioned at the start, we were a bit worried really, given the fact that we'd fished for a couple of hours before we started to get any bites, and Chappy was shaking his head a bit. But I think you've got to realise this is a really big lake. It's a big expanse of water, and to expect to just come and drop straight on the fish and start catching them straight away, particularly this time of year, I think it's a big ask. And you do need to be patient sometimes and just keep feeding, keep trying different methods, you know, different forms of presentation. And like today, suddenly out of a blue, the fish turn up, so you've got to keep the faith. Well, at the moment I'm catching on the bottom. In fact, I'm fishing about 6 inches over depth, and I've got a feeling that with time, if I continue to keep feeding like I am, we might start to catch them up in the water. But at the moment I'm definitely finding that I need to keep the bait pretty much on the bottom. And I love fishing like this when you're fishing the caster for roach. It's a really, I don't know, just a really satisfying way of fishing, and there's not much better than catching roach like this on the caster. And this is definitely another nice one. Absolutely beautiful. Well, that roach has got to be 12 ounces at the very least. Let's get him in the net. Well, the roach are coming really well now, and I've had 3 or 4 of those bigger stamp ones, sort of between 12 ounces and a pound. And I'm still really nurturing the swim. I'm not feeding heavily, I'm just feeding 5 or 6 casters, at least every sort of drop in, maybe twice a drop in. And there's another fish there. They're still hard on the bottom, but as with often the case when you're roach fishing, you've got to fish with some finesse. And I'm fishing with a gram float, but I've actually shotted it with number 8 and number 10 shot. And what I'm trying to achieve is I'm trying to achieve a balance really between getting my bait down to where the fish are feeding quickly and efficiently, but also to present the caster in the correct way. So obviously I'm loose feeding casters, and those casters are constantly falling through the water, and I think the roach at the moment are quite near the bottom or on the bottom. But as mad as it sounds, I think they're actually perhaps watching the casters that are falling down. So if I fished with a more positive rig, perhaps given the depth of water, you know, the fact that I'm fishing at least 15 foot, you could be tempted to fish a heavier float, and I think you wouldn't get such good presentation. And I also think if you fished a bulk or an olivette with just a couple of droppers, you wouldn't get such good presentation. So what I'm actually doing is I'm making sure that I lay my rig nicely out on the water. I'm loose feeding the casters. And what I'm actually doing then is I'm lifting my float up out the water and I'm just lowering it back down into the water. So in my mind now, the spread bulk of shot has settled and I've got at least a 2 or 3 foot drop where the caster's falling through that zone where the fish are feeding. And that's exactly what happened then. I got a bite just as the bottom shot and the caster was perhaps just touching the bottom. And I'm obviously catching all different sizes at the moment, but as the session progresses we might find out a better way of perhaps targeting the bigger roach. But on another day you just find that you catch them in amongst the shoal fish. So there's clearly a lot of roach feeding out there at the moment. And another thing to mention is, particularly because it's a new venue for me and I just wanted to try and get bites to start with, I'm fishing quite fine. I'm fishing with a 010 hook length and an 18 fine wire hook. Obviously if I started hooking bigger fish like bream or carp, I'd need to step up the gear, but when you're targeting roach, and particularly big roach, you've got to emphasise how important it is to really fish with some finesse. As the session progresses, I think I'm going to start to loose feed more casters, so I'm going to start to be a bit braver and start to introduce more casters. I've got 3 pints of beautiful fresh casters, and that might help to improve the stamp of the fish as well. But still, I'll be very careful. I won't go mad because it'd be very easy to overfeed the fish and spook them and end up not catching any more. So I mentioned about how I present the bait by laying the rig in the water, and something I perhaps missed out was the fact that I'm keeping a tight line at all times between the pole tip and the float. And I've actually got at the moment quite a long length of line, really, perhaps more than you'd expect for fishing on a lake. I've got about 3 foot of line above the float. And the reason I've done that is it's actually quite a strong wind at times today. It's blowing left to right. And what it's enabling me to do is to really keep a tight line with the float. So as the float and the rig settles through the water, I can read it really well and react like that very, very quickly. So if I just simply put the rig in and sort of dumped it and didn't keep a tight line, I think you lose the control and you perhaps don't get the same drop of caster through the water. And obviously, whether you've got a wind like this, you need to get your pole tip above the float in order to achieve that. This is another better stamped roach, look. It's just really fantastic fishing because you're having to sort of almost trick each fish as you're catching them. Look at that. And as with nearly all the roach I've caught today, it's absolutely immaculate. Look at that fish, it's scale perfect, it's absolutely beautiful. It's got such red fins. Wow, what an amazing session. Well, I mentioned about the wind, and the wind's been blowing quite hard and created quite an interesting situation where there's a quite strong undertow that's actually flowing back against the wind. So something that you need to bear in mind when you're fishing deeper lakes like this, particularly on a windy day, is to bear in mind the effects of the undertow. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going to go a little bit deeper. I've had perhaps 2 or 3 casts where I haven't had a fish, and I'm going to now try and fish a bit more over depth just to ensure that my caster is settling on the bottom correctly. And at times today certainly when it went calmer, there wasn't an undertow, but I'm going to now try and I'm actually laying my rig in the opposite way, so against the wind, and see if that helps. And I'm just going to let the caster settle by keeping a tight line on the float and just hold it in position and see if that will get me a bite. Obviously I'm trying to concentrate my loose feeding in a tightish area, but what's interesting is sometimes you'll find that the fish are actually feeding away from where the casters are landing, and again that's got to be something to do with the flow, the undertow, or the effect of the wind on the water. So it does pay to have a search around your swim, certainly if you stop getting bites, and you can suddenly find where the fish are feeding. There we go. That did the trick. It was about probably a metre away from where I'm actually feeding. And it's another nice roach. You can see I'm having to take my time because I mentioned I'm not fishing too heavy, and I'm fishing with a 5 elastic, so everything's balanced nicely, and obviously when I'm hooking a bed of roach like this, I'm just taking my time. Absolutely wonderful. I think that's what Alan Barnes would call a crumper. Absolutely brilliant. Well, the pole I'm using today is CP2000, and it's available up to 16 metres. Obviously today I'm only fishing it at 11 metres, but it's such a tremendously versatile pole. Obviously I tend to fish on rivers, canals and commercials, and it's an all-round pole. It truly is very versatile. That's an absolutely spectacular roach again. Might be a pound, that one. They're so chunky, the roach. Don't know if you can see that, but they're in. I already mentioned how amazing they are in terms of their condition, but they're obviously got a lot of natural food here because they're real chunky fish. But I was mentioning about the pole, and we're looking forward to doing some more videos on commercials, catching bigger carp to prove how strong they are. They really are a robust pole. And once again the tow's really increased, and like before it's flowing from right to left. And what I'm having to do is just constantly change the presentation, change the depth and the shotting pattern to keep in touch with the fish. But they're such good quality fish, I don't really mind waiting for a bite with those. It's funny that the smaller stamp roach have all but disappeared now. We'll talk about the rigs and my baits in a bit more detail, but I found that burying the caster with the hook inside the caster has definitely been better today. And it's quite interesting, the lake itself is quite clear, and these bigger roach, they're not giving themselves up, so it's really interesting fishing. The other thing I was thinking about was I was just starting to think about cupping some more ground bait in. After that initial feed of 4 balls, I haven't fed any ground bait, I've just been loose feeding. And because it had gone off a little bit, I thought about maybe cupping in a couple of balls, which I still might do. But sometimes that can kickstart the swim if it's gone a bit dead. But also conversely, you know, it can kill the swim if the roach don't really want the ground bait. So we'll see how we go, and if it does prove to get a bit harder, then I think I'll risk it. That's the fascinating thing about fishing a new venue, just working out its moods and how the fish react to the feeding. And obviously that can change throughout the year as well. I'd love to come back in the summer and try again, because I'm sure you'd catch these roach up in the water with the caster, and you might even catch them on hempen tears, so that could be the subject for another video. Well, let's have a look at the rig I'm using in a bit more detail. Makes a change really, but so far today I've only used one rig on the pole. And I mentioned I selected this Gram float. It's a sort of inverted pear shaped body with a really good thick hollow tip, and that's proved really great today. I mentioned earlier in the video that I'm trying to get the right compromise between being able to control the float easily and hold the float well in the water, but also give a good presentation to trick the roach without being too heavy. That float's worked really well. It's got a carbon stem, and the shotting pattern I think is really important. So you can see there I've got a bulk of number 8 shots, but I've spread the bulk out so they're not all close together. And it's been critical to constantly move these shots, move the position of the spread bulk from where the hook is. You can see at the moment that I must have 3 to 4 foot there between the hook and the bulk, and that's just helping me. The bulk's helping me control the float, get the bait down to the feeding zone, and then just by having these number 10 shots spread out, I've got 4 number 10 shot below. That's enabling me to read the bites and present the caster very well. And at the moment I've got quite a long amount of line between the hook and the first dropper. You can see there's my hook length, and I've actually moved the number 10 up. I'm actually fishing at a foot over depth at the moment. I mentioned about the increase in tow, and by fishing that much over depth I'm definitely getting more bites and I'm getting better quality fish. Line wise, the main line I'm using is this Vest Pro. It's a 0.125mm main line, and the hook length I've been using is this 0.97. So it's a nice sensible rig really today. If I was catching some bigger fish like bigger bream, I could increase my hook length, even fish straight through. But today, fishing a bit more finesse is definitely helping catching the big roach. Hook wise, I've settled with this hook, which is a size 18 Guru F1 pellet barbless. So even though it's called F1, I'm finding it to be a really great hook for fishing the caster. You can see it's not too big. It's got a nice fine wire. They're extremely sharp, I think this is a good opportunity to show you how I'm hooking the casters. You can see I've got my casters here. They're extremely fresh. I've got them from, I'm lucky that I live near Lanes in Coventry. And you can see that maggot there is actually still alive. So these are extremely fresh casters. They're a lovely size. And I like the fact that they're different colours, because on different days you can find with casters that a different hook bait colour can be better. Today I'm finding the darker casters are better, and I think that might be due to the fact that the water's quite clear. So I'm going to pick one there and I'm going to show you how I hook the caster, and there are different ways of doing it. One way is to hook it like a maggot in the blunt end and leave the hook point showing like that. That's perhaps the way I tend to hook the caster most. You tend to bump less fish, and I still think that the caster's, you know, it's not being burst in any way, and that looks very natural. But today it's definitely been better to bury the hook inside the caster. So I'll get another caster. Most of the time when I bury the hook, I like to bury it in the pointed end. So you can see I'll put the point in there, the point of the caster, and then very gently thread it through, and then just with the finger push it down. Oh, I just let it go. I might need to do that again, or we might have got away with it. There we go. So you can see that I've actually hidden the hook inside the caster. And that can be, well, a deadly method when the roach are being really tricky like they are at times today. I tend to put it through the pointed end rather than the fat end, because again I think you miss less bites, you bump less fish. If you put it through the thicker end, that end's tougher, and sometimes you can have problem striking the hook through the caster. So that's a good tip to bear in mind. I've bought a variety of other hook baits today. Just obviously it's a new venue, and there was a chance of catching on the feeder. So I've got fluoro pinkies, I've got dead fluoro pinkies, I've got some red and white live maggots, and also some red and white dead maggots, and I've also got some worms. So finally, I guess the thing to talk about is the ground bait. And definitely when you're fishing on a big venue like this, starting off with some ground bait is going to provide some attraction, hopefully attract the fish into your peg where you're feeding and hold the fish there. I like to keep my ground bait mixed up in a bag like that, so I can take it out when I need it, so it keeps fresh and it keeps all the smells from the ground bait. And the actual ground bait I'm using today is really simple. It's just, I've just used Neat Bait Tech Pro Natural Bream, and I've used a dark colour because we mentioned about the water clarity, and the dark ground bait, particularly when you're fishing for shy fish like roach and bream, can help as it blends into the bottom. And this is a new ground bait, but one that I've found to be really great when I'm targeting roach and skimmers. Well, I tried topping up with some ground bait, and I've had a few more nice roach, but the last half an hour has gone really tough, so I think I'm going to have one more cast now and just try and catch one more fish. If I don't, we're going to call it a day. It's been an amazing day fishing, and I can't wait to see the final catch. One thing that's been amazing today is the bird song. I don't know if you can pick it up on my microphone, but the birds have been so loud, and it's been absolutely beautiful listening to them in the trees above me. That's a duck that's giving it some there, but it's just wonderful being out in the spring. And I'm looking forward to the longer days, so hopefully get some more great sessions in soon. Oh well, that last cast failed. Never mind, it's been a wonderful session and I've thoroughly enjoyed fishing a different venue. It's definitely one that I'm going to get back to. Let's have a look at what we've caught. I think you're going to like this. I've not had a net of roach like this for a long time. Absolute crumpers. I've got 18 to 20 pound there, and just the quality of them is absolutely superb. Let's get them back. Thanks for watching. Alan Barnes, eat your heart out.